For this course, we are going to be using virtualization applications from a company called VMware. The VM presumably is virtual machines. Virtualization is their business. They are, probably fair to say, the leading vendor of this type of software. They also do hosting and all sorts of other things. They provide software for you to run your own hosted service. So VMware is all about virtualization. There are other companies that have similar capabilities. Microsoft has an application called VirtualBox, which some of you have used, and a couple of people asked me about it. There are some open source or freely available ones. There's one called something Zen. There's Docker is another one. I've not used those. I just know the names. At Mason, we have a licensing arrangement with VMware to enable students and faculty to get access to this software. And I put information on that in the discussion board in Blackboard. Raise your hand if you've read that information. Okay, if you have not, please do so. You'll need that for the next assignment. So please do that today if you have not read that. Raise your hand if you've filled out the form in order to get access to the software. Good, so a handful of people have done that already. Again, if you have not done that, please do that. Follow the instructions. You fill out the form, and it may not be till the next business day until that form gets acted upon, particularly if you do it today. It's getting late in the day. I don't know what it takes for that to happen behind the scenes, but within a business day or so, you should be able to get access to that. So we use VMware rather than VirtualBox or anything else because that's what we have available to us here at Mason for free. And I've been using it for many years. It enables us to do all the things that we want to do. One of its strengths, according to reviews that I've read, is it has excellent virtual networking. The networking in VMware is very robust. It works very well. Some of the other products apparently have issues with that. One thing I have found is if I run my computer for a long time between reboots and then I run VMware, sometimes the virtual networking has issues. I suspect it is not VMware. I suspect it's other applications that I'm running that are doing things and not cleaning up their use of the network. But I often find that I go in to do something and it's not working and a reboot fixes it. So I would recommend when you are working with VMware, reboot your system. Don't start up a whole bunch of other applications. Just don't do anything except run VMware, and then you should have no issues at all. And once you've done the work for the assignment, then go ahead and load all the other stuff that you tend to have running on your computer. Okay, so that's just my pro tip. If good practice, it's good practice to reboot your computer occasionally anyway to avoid the kind of issue I just had in a lecture. But I would recommend reboot your computer, do your VMware work, and you should have no issues of the sort that I described. VMware products, there are two products that we're interested in. There's a whole bunch of other products for other contexts, but the ones that we're interested in are called Workstation. It's now called Workstation Pro. Just write that here just to be complete. So Workstation Pro is, oops, that should be capital W. That is the product for Windows. Fusion is the product for Mac. If you have an older Mac using an x86-64 CPU, then that is fine. It may not be as fast as some of the later ones, but it should be perfectly fine for this course. So if you have a Mac prior to the M1 series with the so-called Apple Silicon, then VMware Fusion is the equivalent product. It is not 100% identical, but it is, I would say, 99% the same. There's a couple of differences in it, but I've had students with Macs, older Macs using Fusion who've been able to do all the work for the course. But if you have a modern Mac with an M1 or later Apple Silicon chip in it, then you will not be able to do the work on that computer. You're going to need to find another computer, either at the labs or use someone else's computer. word of warning, if you're using another student's computer, particularly another student in this course, you need to take extreme care not to use each other's VMs or do anything that would result in an honor code violation. So be extremely cautious if you're in that environment. Okay, I just talked about the Apple Silicon issue. So the issue there is you can only virtualize the same CPU. They're using a different CPU, and the things that I need in order for me to be able to look at your work, I need you to create a VM with the same kind of CPU that the rest of us are using. I don't know the long-term solution to that. When this issue first came up, when Apple first came out with the new CPUs, there was talk that seemed to suggest that the virtualization companies were working on a solution, but I don't know what a solution would look like. I think emulation would end up being quite poor in terms of performance. Now, for us, it wouldn't matter because none of the things we're doing out of need very high performance at all. But in terms of realistic use of these things, that I think is not a practical solution. So I don't know if there's any real solution to that in the near future. I mentioned the networking in VMware. VMware has excellent networking. There are several different types of networks supported by the VMware Workstation Fusion products, and I'll just mention them briefly here. What they call bridged networking uses the real computer's hardware and the real computer's existing connection to the internet. So it just looks like one more application. If you're running your computer and you've got a browser open and you've got something else that's using the network, maybe a file transfer program or something like that, they're all using the same connection. The bridge networking would allow a virtual machine to appear to be just one more application using the same networking connection. They have what is called NAT, network address translation. Oops, what's happening here? Whoa, something just blew up. Network address translation, you will remember that term from IT 366 that we use to do hide mode NAT and things like that to enable a single computer to hide the existence of multiple different computers behind it. So you have a router running NAT with a single connection to the internet, and behind it there are actually multiple computers using it. So we can have our virtual machines appear to be those back-end computers hidden behind a NAT interface. So this uses the real networking of the computer to the outside world, but it uses different ports on the same connection. So not a whole lot of difference between bridged and NAT in terms of nothing you would notice, except the IP addressing may be slightly different. And sometimes one of them, in certain situations, you may find one of them works and the other doesn't, and vice versa, or you may find they both work. These are used for connections to the actual internet. I saw someone had a hand up, but I don't see a question, so I'll keep going. And then the other type of networking is host only. In VMware terminology, the host is the real computer and the guests are the virtual machines. So when we say host only, we mean a network only within the real computer. So you can have virtual machines running within the VMware software and they can communicate with each other over a host only network. And the real computer can also participate in that host only network. This is very useful when you don't want to connect to the internet. There's two issues with connecting to the internet. One, if you're connected to the internet, there are people on the internet who will then be trying to hack into your system, causing all sorts of issues. Many years ago, I got a new computer, a work computer, and before I even turned it on, I went to talk to Mr. Goldman, the director, and I said, what should I do about security? He said, oh, I'm glad you came to me. He said, we have just discovered that when we connect a new computer, when a student connects a computer to the dorm networks, for example, within 30 seconds, they are getting bombarded by attacks from the outside world. So one of the issues we don't want is for people trying to hack into our virtual machines while we're trying to do work with them. The other thing, if we turn that around, if we are experimenting with malware or something like that, or something that might cause a denial of service attack, we've got a runaway script or something like that, we don't want to connect to the real internet and cause problems for other people. So host-only networks are very useful to us. And most of the time we're going to be using host-only networks. The exception would be where we need to connect to the real internet, for example, to install some software or something like that. And in that case, we might temporarily change a connection to NAT or bridge to do the thing we need to do, and then switch it back to a host-only network. VMware supports multiple host-only networks, and for some of our work, we're going to be using 3 different host-only networks. We may set up a typical T configuration firewall like this, and the firewall has connections to 3 separate networks, and we'll have 3 separate virtual networks, one representing the outside world, one representing the DMZ, one representing the trusted internal network. And we can do all of that virtualized. Which reminds me, going back to the discussion we were having about resources, were we somewhere around here? I've lost the thing since I came back. Oh yeah, we were talking about, in particular, the amount of RAM that you have. So if you've got enough RAM, let's say, to run 2 VMs, so you've got this much RAM and you need to run 2 VMs that look like this, and clearly there's not enough room for a third one, and you're trying to do the thing I showed where you've got the firewall and you've got 3 different legs with multiple virtual machines in each. If you don't have a lot of memory, you're going to be constrained into how many virtual machines you can run at once. Now, you can suspend one of them, and so you can have 3 of them, one of which is suspended, and its memory will be swapped out to disk. So there are cases where you may run the firewall plus 1, and then the firewall plus another, and so on. It is possible to do that. But far and away, the best thing to do is to have lots of memory. And that is true for any applications, not just virtualization. If you do lots of things on your computer, if you've got lots of applications open and you find your computer tends to run slow, it's probably running into paging because you don't have a lot of RAM. I would recommend on typical modern computers, I would aim for something like 32 gigabits of RAM would be a good number to have. And if you've got that much, you won't have any issues. With the VMs we're running, we will typically be running about 2 gigabytes of RAM per VM. So add a factor on top of that, add a little bit more. So let's say about 2.5 on average. If you've only got 8 gigabytes of RAM, you're going to be struggling to run 3. You might just be able to run 3, but that may be an issue. So I would suggest 16 would be good, 32 would be great. RAM is not terribly expensive. The one issue that we have is that modern laptops tend to only come with 2 slots for RAM. And if your laptop currently has both slots full, which is not uncommon, sometimes you need to remove both the memory banks and replace them both. So instead of just adding 1, you need to kind of add 2 more. But we're talking about on the order of about $100 per bank of RAM. So that's an upgrade I would make. If your computer seems to be running slow, it's probably not anything to do with the CPU. It's probably just constrained by the amount of RAM that you have. Okay, so that made me think of that. Okay. I mentioned that within a host-only network, the real computer can be part of the host-only network. The one thing I don't like about VMware, one of the very few significant issues I've ever had with it. When you have a host-only network and you want to connect the real computer to it, they have what they call a host virtual adapter. And this is, it looks like if you had an extra network interface on your computer, it creates a virtual network interface on your computer into the host-only network. The software, the VMware software, automatically takes the first available IP address, and we'll be using IP version 4 just because it's simpler than using IP version 6. So the first available address is the one ending in .1. A common convention is that the .1 address in a subnetwork is a gateway, and we'll be using that convention. So VMware creates a conflict where the real computer has the same IP address as another device on the network, and that causes all sorts of issues. So I'm going to show you a practice. We're going to manually reallocate the IP address. It's unfortunate. I don't know why VMware takes the first one. I mean, that's a really poor choice. I'd rather they take the highest available one, like the .254 address or something like that. But that's just something that we've learned through experience, and you'll get the hang of that once we do that. Okay, I want to run a demonstration of VMware at this point, but I'm not sure if I'm able to because my license has expired. I'm waiting to get a new one. So I may be able to create the machine but not turn it on, and that may be enough for right now. So let me try this.